Hi folks, this will be the first video in our series, Canadian History from 1840 to Our Times. The purpose of the series is to help you prepare for your ministry exams, and while this video is not a comprehensive look at the history of Canada, neither will it replace your studying. Its purpose is to guide you through the crucial moments in the history of Quebec and Canada. So let's just dive right in.
The rebellions of 1837 and 38 challenged the long-standing lack of democracy between the French and British populations. The rebellions failed, several rebels were executed, and Lord John Durham was appointed by the British government to determine solutions to the growing animosity between the French and the British.
Durham felt that the best way to end the hatred between these two groups, which he felt were two nations warring in the bosom of a single state, was to unite Upper and Lower Canada in order to assimilate the French. This led to Canada getting a new constitution in 1840, which was the Act of Union.
So, what did the Act of Union do? Well, its main goal was to assimilate the French and make them a minority in the new government's Legislative Assembly. Upper Canada was also in debt because of canal and railroad construction. So, the Act of Union was meant to get Lower Canada to help pay off some of that debt. Lower Canada benefited from customs duties from the many ports among the Fleuve Saint-Laurent. Since the two Canadas were united, this was no longer the case. Finally, Durham felt that uniting the two Canadas would promote trade within the new province.
Once the Act of Union came into effect in February 1841, how did it affect the political and territorial structure of this new province? Well, right from the start there were problems. The population of Lower Canada was larger than that of Upper Canada, but they still ended up having the same number of representatives in the Legislative Assembly at 42 each. Lower Canada was a mix of Francophone and Anglophone peoples, so the majority of the Legislative Assembly was controlled by English Canadian members. This wasn't the only problem. Aside from joining the debts of the two Canadas, English was to be the only official language of government, so you can guess how that made the French react. The positives for French Canadians was that Lower Canada still had French civil law, while Upper Canada had British civil law. British criminal law was for all of Canada.
There wasn't much that French Canadians could do initially, because while the Legislative Assembly could adopt bills, the Governor and the Legislative Council, both were still appointed by the British government, could block these laws from being passed. It's like getting money for your birthday to buy something you want, but your parents won't let you spend the money because they control your bank account.
With the new constitution, Canada divided into two political groups. The first group was the Reformers, made up of both French and English Canadians, who wanted responsible government and the rights of French Canadians protected. The second group was the Conservatives, or Tories, who were mostly English Canadian with only two French Canadian members. They didn't want political change because as Anglophones, they had influence over the governorship and the councils.
The reformers of Upper and Lower Canada, Robert Baldwin and Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine, joined together in 1841 in an alliance to create a majority in the Legislative Assembly in 1842. The arrangement was the French would support the English in laws relating to the economy, and the English would support the French in protecting their language and culture in Lower Canada.
While this alliance was taking place, what was happening with the colony's economy? Well, the British government decided to end their economic policy of protectionism, where the British government bought resources from its colonies. In 1846, London ended protectionist policy and preferential tariffs on the British market for Canadian grain merchants. With the end of this policy, merchants in Canada were not happy because they now had to compete with foreign markets instead of being protected by a mother country.
While the end of protectionism forced the colonies to become more economically autonomous or independent, it also led to a demand for greater political independence for the province of Canada. In 1848, the Baldwin-Lafontaine alliance won the majority seats in the Legislative Assembly, and London granted ministerial responsibility to the province of Canada. This led to the first responsible government in the province of Canada.
So how was this political system different than what came before? Well, now members of the Executive Council, a group who were once appointed by the British governor, were chosen from the elected members of the Legislative Assembly. To keep its power, the Executive Council had to propose bills that received support from the majority of members in the Legislative Assembly. Furthermore, the Executive Council was able to recommend people to be part of the Legislative Council, the people who approved the actual laws. This was a big deal and meant that French and Anglophone Canadians were gaining more control over the internal affairs of the province. But the British still controlled the external affairs. So any agreements that were made between the province and Canada and other countries was negotiated by the British. Canada was still a colony, not a country.
During this time, Baldwin and LaFontaine were protecting the interests of French Canadians. One big moment was getting French to be a language of use in the Legislative Assembly. They also passed laws granting amnesty or pardon to the patriots from the rebellions of 1837 and 1838. Also, compensation for victims of the rebellions. The Rebellion Losses Bill ensured that anyone who suffered loss during the rebellion should receive money. The majority of victims were French, so this law infuriated English Canadians, and in response, on April 25, 1849, they sacked and burned the Parliament building in Montreal.
But what about the First Nations in Canada during this time? Well, their land was increasingly being taken over for development by the colony. In 1842, the Governor-General of the British North American colonies launched a commission into the administration of Indian affairs. In 1844, the Bagot Commission submitted its report. The First Nations of Canada was greatly affected by the forestry industry in Lower Canada. In 1851, a law was passed to set aside 230,000 acres for the First Nations. These lands were divided into reserves for the exclusive use of the First Nations people. Non-native people couldn't settle there.
The goal of the government was to stop the native people from taking part in their ancestral activities of hunting and fishing. Instead, they promoted agriculture, which would lead several nomadic First Nations communities to become sedentary. This would free up land that was once used for hunting and fishing, which could now be used for the exploitation and colonization of the area.
So in order to make sure you connect all these ideas, we're going to do our big takeaway for this video, which is TTR, which stands for the thing, therefore, and as a result. Let me show you how it works. So the thing that happened was that London passed the Act of Union in 1841, which united Upper and Lower Canada. Therefore, French Canadians became a minority in the Legislative Assembly because the British wanted to assimilate the French. As a result, the reformers led by Baldwin and LaFontaine formed an alliance to ensure a majority in the Legislative Assembly, to demand responsible government, and to protect the rights of French Canadians. You see, that's it. The thing, therefore, as a result. TTR.
So, let's try it again, by talking about what happened with Baldwin and LaFontaine. Well, the thing that happened is that in 1848, the Baldwin-LaFontaine Alliance formed the first responsible government in the province of Canada. Therefore, they passed laws that were favorable towards French Canadians instead of pushing an agenda of assimilation. As a result, English Canadians are not too happy about this and voice their opinion by burning down the Parliament building in Montreal.
So now you give it a try. Here are 3 topics. Pause the video and try and connect them using the TTR method and any notes you have from this video or class. The thing that happened was the Bagot Commission was launched to look at the administration of Indian affairs within the province of Canada. Therefore, the Commission recommended the creation of reserves for the First Nations exclusively, not only to assimilate them, but also so that they would farm and become sedentary, and not take part in traditional hunting and fishing activities. As a result, their traditional lands could be used by the province of Canada for colonization and the exploitation of resources. That's it. In our next video, we'll look at the road that led to the Canadian Federation. Take care. Say goodbye.
Goodbye.